Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're doing well during this lockdown. I'm going to talk about the legendary Bill Kunkel and what led up to him writing the foreword to my second classic home video games book. I hope you guys are doing well during this strange period of time we're living in, this lockdown caused by the pandemic. I've been, just trying to make the best of it. I've been playing some Atari 2600 Donkey Kong. I saw John Riggs' recent video where he talked about just some different Atari games. And he talked about Donkey Kong, and it made me want to play it. So I spent 4 hours playing this stupid game over, the last 2 days. It's a lot of fun. There's only two screens of the four from the arcade, and I have better versions for it for the NES and ColecoVision. But hey, this one's a lot of fun, and the controls are great, and it works really well, and it's actually a lot of fun. And I've also been playing Venture for the Intellivision. Obviously, I have a better version of this game on my ColecoVision, but this one's different and it's kind of interesting. Having a lot of fun with this as well. Probably one of the better Coleco branded games for the Intellivision. Anyway, let's get to Bill Kunkel now. Bill Kunkel was a legend in the gaming industry. He helped co-found video game journalism. In '79, he was doing a column for a computer magazine, electronics magazine. I believe it was called Video. And he did a column, him and Arnie Katz, and with Joyce Worley, they founded Electronic Games Magazine in 1981. Now, I was 14 years old during this time, and I was reading Electronic Games Magazine like crazy. I would go to the grocery store, and I would read this magazine, beautifully illustrated magazine, 2 pieces. I bought some when I could afford them, but more often than not, I would just read them at the grocery store. Now, I was also reading Video Gaming and Computer Gaming Illustrated. Love that spot cover. The creatively titled Video Games Magazine. Joystick, notice the misspelling, Joystick Magazine. That was sort of their branding. All these kinds of magazines. Electronic Games was my favorite. And the reason I would read them at grocery stores instead of like convenience stores was because for whatever reason at grocery stores, I guess they were more concerned about people, squeezing the produce or whatever. They didn't care if you stood at their magazine rack all day long. I'd ride my bike to Safeway and I'd stay there 2 hours just reading, the new video game magazines that would come in, including electronic games. Now, if you tried to do this at 7-Eleven or one of these mom and pop convenience stores, and this happened to me more than once, they'd say, son, this ain't no library. Get out of here. Buy it or, put it down or buy it, whatever. Don't, this ain't no library. You can't read for free. And so I would either buy what I was reading or more often than not, I would just leave. Or I got to the point where I would just go to grocery stores to read for free because they did not care. And so anyway, so the greatness of Bill Kunkel, Electronic Games Magazine was very formative in my writing career. It's, I just grew up, I grew up loving to read all kinds of stuff, novels, reference books, magazines and everything. And today, I've been writing, I've been a professional writer for over 20 years, and I thank Electronic Games for part of that, and Bill Kunkel specifically. Today I'm writing for Old School Gamer magazine, another high quality, fully illustrated magazine, very cool. Oldschoolgamer.com, you can find that. Anyway, so I owe that in part to Electronic Games Magazine. And so I want to talk a little bit, I want to read you the foreword he wrote for my second classic home video games book covering the NES Master System and 7800. But I want to talk a little bit about how I met Bill and how this came about before I actually read the foreword. Now, I had gone to the 2006 San Diego Comic-Con, and so I loved it so much I wanted to go the next year to the 2007 one. But that was it was the same weekend as the Classic Gaming Expo that year. Those were on the same weekend that year, and I chose Classic Gaming Expo over San Diego Comic-Con because Bill Kunkel was going to be there. That was one of the big reasons I chose that over San Diego. And I'd gone to the Classic Gaming Expo since 2003, so I knew it was going to be a great show, and I wanted to meet Bill Kunkel and just talk about how influential he he was on me with writing and everything. Anyway, so 2007, I actually had my first book had actually been published by then. I believe it was published in the spring of that year, so I had it in time for that summer for the Classic Gaming Expo. Classic Home Video Games 72 through 84, covering Atari, ColecoVision, Intellivision, Odyssey 2, and all those great consoles, Vectrex. And so I actually had a little booth there, and I was selling copies of my book, and at one point, Bill Kunkel and Laurie Kunkel. I hadn't actually met him yet. He was going to do a panel that weekend, but I hadn't talked to him or met him yet or gone to the panel. And he came up to my table there, and him and Laurie were talking. They were talking to me about the book, and he was flipping through it. And he noticed the hardcover binding and, you know, textbook quality and how nicely laid out it was. And he could tell, you know, it was professionally published by McFarlane and, yeah, McFarlane Publishers. But anyway, he was very impressed that, you know, what was then, you know, retro gaming was considered a niche market in 2006, 2007, you know, because Angry Video Game Nerd and, you know, the Wii Shop channel were just, you know, 2007 or so, all that stuff was just coming into play. And at that point, retro gaming books were pretty scarce, few and far between. So he was impressed by the quality of this book and that, you know, an academic publisher like McFarlane would publish a book about Atari and that kind of thing. He thought that was really cool. And so they actually bought a copy. Laurie, I'm sitting there, and they're going through it. And I thought, oh, he'll say a couple of nice things. He's a nice guy. His wife was really sweet. Hey, Laurie, hope you watch this. So she pulled out her purse, and they bought a copy. It was a $55 hardcover book, no questions asked. Boom, gave me the money, and Bill wanted me to autograph it, and I was honored beyond belief because here's a guy, you know, I grew up idolizing in '81. You know, like I said, I was 14 years old, and just Electronic Games Magazine was just awesome to me. And Bill Kunkel, the game doctor, you know, big hero of mine growing up, and just for him to not only come by my booth, say hello, and to not only, you know, buy the book, he wanted me to sign it. I thought that was just amazing. And so he did have a panel later in that weekend, and that was awesome, and talked to him again there. He did a panel about the demise of Tips and Tricks magazine, which he also wrote for. And of course, obviously that was much later than Electronic Games Magazine. And he talked about the decline and fall of print video game journalism in general. Now, even 2007, even back then, there was an obvious downturn in print media, print journalism, because the internet was so pervasive. And, you know, people could just read stuff for free. And so he talked about that. And they had a great panel. And so after that convention, I kept in touch with him online. We emailed back and forth a few times, and I reached out to him because I was working on the second book in the Classic Home Video Game series at that time. I asked him if he would like to write the foreword. Now, I didn't have a foreword to my first book. I guess I didn't even think about it. It was my first book, and I thought, I want a forewordist for the second one. Who better than Bill Kunkel, someone who co-founded, you know, Electronic Games Magazine and co-founded video game journalism in general. Electronic Games Magazine was huge. At one point, you know, at their peak, they had a circulation of over 250,000 copies per issue. And the magazine, I mean, these pioneering journalists invented a lot of the terminology we still use today, like screenshots, playfield, gameplay mechanics, Easter egg in video games, you know, those hidden features in video games, things like that. Electronic Games Magazine and Bill Kunkel, Joyce Worley, and Arnie Katz pioneered, you know, video game journalism and these terms and everything else. You know, all the video game writing that we know of today dates back in some sense to that, you know, the foundings of video game journalism. And so Bill Kunkel was very nice. He said, absolutely, I'd love to do it. It would be my honor. And yeah, maybe so, but it was definitely my honor instead. So even cooler than him, you know, coming up to my booth to say hi, even cooler than him, you know, wanting a book and wanting me to autograph it was for him to actually write a foreword to my book, Classic Home Video Games 85 to 88, covering that span of time when, you know, the NES, Master System, and 7800 come out during that window. Foreword by Bill Kunkel. So it's really cool they put him on the cover because great selling point for, you know, hardcore gamers. And so without further ado, let me just read the foreword he wrote. It was excellent. He talks about the industry at large at that time and before, and just really provides a great setup for the book. So there you go, foreword by Bill Kunkel. More than any other companies in the history of electronic gaming, Nintendo, Sega, and later Sony established video games as a lifestyle, a hobby that would endure beyond the video game craze of the 70s. Following the great implosion of '83, as the age of Atari crumbled, game console and software sales tanked, and American industry and retail alike closed the coffin lid on the video game as a viable entertainment format and shoveled on the dirt. In their heart of hearts, after all, most American retailers and even many executives within the industry itself had always viewed the video game boom as a fad. Throughout the entire mid to late 80s, or throughout the entire mid-'80s, the only place most Americans played electronic games was on computers or at the arcades. And the only games the computers offered were coin-op derivatives or text, and later illustrated and even animated RPGs and adventure games. For most Americans, video games were now perceived as the carrot-on-the-stick gateway to the computer and every house world that many people thought would take place 20 years before it actually happened. But the Japanese never lost faith. Japanese coin-op manufacturers had, in many ways, helped create the second-generation American video game boom, i.e. the age of Atari, with games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man, and they saw no diminution of interest among Japanese gamers. In other words, there was no great video game crash in Japan. Simultaneously, a phrase was beginning to permeate the world of 7-disc computer games. Intolerable delays in loading new content, the incredible range of power among even the same company's microcomputers, as well as a labyrinth of audio and video augmentation boards that made system software compatibility an issue in every purchase. That's one reason I like consoles, because especially then, with cross-pollination was much easier on a single game console as opposed to a single type of computer. I can buy this really cool-looking game, but it's going to play like crap on my computer if it plays at all. Then there was the question of whether software publishers should be making games at all, when they could concentrate their efforts on the more academic-sounding simulations. And all of it took that phrase from a murmur to a command. That phrase was plug and play. The old joys of ripping a plastic-encased game board directly out of the box, putting it into your game system and seeing it on the TV suddenly acquired a nostalgic appeal. Moreover, computer gaming was and remains a socially isolated experience. Online play has long allowed computer gamers to test their skills against gamers in remote locations. But the key word there was remote. People began to remember how much fun it had been to play against their brother, sister, parents, and friends head-to-head in the most comfortable room in the house on a TV screen that was almost certainly larger than your computer monitor. So he's touting the virtues of console gaming over computer gaming, at least in this context. All of these things converged when Nintendo brought its Nintendo Entertainment System, complete with a dorky robot that was eliminated from the system with appropriate swiftness, and Sega introduced its Sega Master System to America. Video games were once again embraced as a part of a lifestyle, as fixed a member of the pop culture pantheon as pop music, movies, and comic books. There will be good years and bad years, we realized, but the idea of the video game itself as a staple of popular entertainment was here to stay, which even to this day, that is definitely true. The Nintendo, Sega, and later Sony era revolutionized the concept of what you could do with video games. Elaborate, action-driven adventures joined the video game landscape, and the platform and scrolling shooter genres became the dominant categories. After all, the Nintendo Sega era redefined the nature of gaming by transitioning gamers from a joystick-driven, one or two action button paradigm to the joypad, an interface that all but demanded an endless diet of platformers. For the first time, the idea of multiple action buttons, direction was now controlled with the left hand via the directional joypad, and the timing required in pushing them became the driving force behind most games of this period. Movement was largely confined to northeast-southwest commands, and the trick was in perfectly timing a jump over a ravine or onto a mushroom. The Nintendo, Sega, and later Sony era taught us to once again love video games, and to this day, Nintendo and Sony remain the world's most successful producers of video game hardware. So take a stroll back through the mid to late 80s when a new voice and a new culture took back the right to enjoy video games. Take it away, Brett. Now, sadly, Bill Kunkel died in 2011 at the age of 61, way too young for anyone to die. Very sad. And when he died, man, social media just blew up like crazy with, retro gamers such as myself just really bemoaning the late, great Bill Kunkel. With that forward, he perfectly set up the book. He established the era for me to, it set the foundation for people maybe new to video games that were, reading about them, more or less for the first time, at least this era. And it provided a great reminder for a lot of us who grew up with this stuff. It just beautifully set the tone for the book. So it was awesome. Thank you so much, Bill Kunkel. Thank you, Lori. Hope you're watching this. All right, so guys, in the comments below, tell me what did you ever meet Bill Kunkel at a gaming convention, or were you friends of his? Tell me your memories of him and of Electronic Games Magazine. Were you like me? Did you read him in the stores? Did you buy every issue? Whatever. Anything about Bill Kunkel or Electronic Games Magazine is fair game. In the comments below, please tell me. I would love to hear about it. We all miss Bill Kunkel. I still think about him frequently when I'm writing about video games, or just I might just hear about, you know, that era or anything. Just a great guy. And so he was just so generous to write that forward, because, you know, if you're a writer, you may know that, you know, writing forwards is not a paying gig, it's an honorary thing. And so he's very generous to donate his time to do that. I really appreciate it. All right, guys, thank you so much for liking this video, and thank you for subscribing to the channel. I will talk to you later. Peace out.